Welcome to Sahara TV. My name is Arao Ameny. We're here with NoViolet Bulawayo. She's a writer, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Thank you. My name is NoViolet Bulawayo, and I'm a Zimbabwean writer.
Okay. So we're going to get right into it. We're going to be talking about Zimbabwean politics, as well as women. So let's just jump into it. In Zimbabwe in 2008, rapes were committed because women supported the opposition. What do you think the Zim government and civil society need to do to deal with human rights abuses to help these women recover? And since you're a writer, how do you think women in Zim can use literature to amplify their voices?
I think the first thing that the Zimbabwean government would need to do is recognize that atrocities were committed on these women. There is an organization right now, Doors of Hope, that was started as a way of providing support to, women victims of political rape. And part of the challenge is that they cannot get support from other bodies that could otherwise help rape victims, specifically because those victims are linked to the political violence that happened. So that makes it complicated. And I'd like to see both the government and other organizations kind of step up, because you are looking at women, besides the violence, some of them also contracted HIV/AIDS, and they are in desperate need of help. As I see myself as a writer, part of my project is to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves, and I'm very interested in voices of people who are at the margins, including these women.
Okay. Can you explain to our audience a little bit about the situation of women and girls in Zimbabwe? How are women recovering and coping if they may not have that structure of support by the government or by institutional bodies?
I'd say, it's a very complicated situation, because at some point, before things started to fall apart politically, Zimbabwean women and girls were at a level that was quite, progressive, and that was part of the policies of the current regime before it turned bad and ugly. Come the political chaos starting from around 2005, that intensified in 2008, where we saw some of the worst human rights violations in our history. Women and girls, obviously being the ones at the margins, were affected the most. I mean, it's a common fact that whenever there's crisis, women suffer in unique ways that men do not necessarily suffer, sexual exploitation being one of them. In terms of coping, the country is struggling to get back on its feet. But unfortunately, the priority, as I already indicated, is not where it needs to be. And yet those are people who are mothering the nation, who are raising children. So you can imagine if they are in such a condition, I think that speaks to where we are going as a society, and it's not a good place.
Okay. You mentioned that before 2005, women in Zimbabwe we had progressive changes. How has that deteriorated? Can you give me some examples of some of the things that women were able to do or what we're doing, and then it just deteriorated?
In terms of progressive, just going to school, the percentages of girls going to school were significantly higher. Women being employed was significantly higher, and with the unraveling of the country, that situation kind of changed for the West. Okay. That said, I think it's also worth noting that there are women right now who are actively working for women's empowerment. I'm thinking of organizations like the Girl Child Network, for example, headed by Betty Makoni, and I'm thinking of young female activists, who I found to be so much of an inspiration. Fungai Machirori, Delta Ndo, who are speaking on behalf of women. I think they've also started this website. It's called Hey Zimbabwe. who's part of their aim is to celebrate and empower women and girls.
Okay, and these women are doing these organizations by themselves from the grassroots level.
They
right?
have to.
They're not waiting for government to.
They are not waiting for government, because obviously the government has made it clear that we are not a priority. So it has to start from the women, I guess, themselves, self-empowerment. But hopefully the government will realize that they too have a role to play. They cannot fail those women forever.
Okay. Some of our viewers may not be aware of Zimbabwean politics in relation to women, in relation to gender. So if you can explain just a little bit how rape in Zim is used as a strategy of politics. If you can just explain that to us, because it's one thing to read it, but then it's one thing to actually, ask someone who is aware of the politics and the policies and how you've been in interaction with these women. So how is rape used as a strategy of politics to quell down voices of opposition?
Rape was used prominently around the 2008 elections, and the few months immediately following, when it was clear that the current regime was not going to win the election, and the wives of opposition supporters and women opposition, women who were in the opposition were gang raped by the party thugs as a way of suppressing their voices.
Okay. And in Zimbabwe, what are ways that women are using the written word? I know we talked yesterday at the panel discussion about women making video or writing poetry or writing prose. In what ways right now are women and girls amplifying their voices?
Zimbabwe is a rich history of the women, of the written word. When you're looking at female writers like Yvonne Vera and Tsitsi Langaremga, who are read broadly. I think when you're looking at new writings from young Zimbabwean women, you have a sense that tradition still carries on. And I'm happy to say that with platforms like Facebook, for example, girls and women are just blogging and telling their stories. With political chaos, I think comes this consciousness, this awakening, so that you find these girls and women actually blogging about what is going on around them. What I'd like to see is that blogging amounting to something more than them just telling their stories, right? Let's get a sense that there are people who are listening and who are taking those voices into account and moving forward for change to happen.
What would you like to see? Would you like to see a change in policy? Tell me what you'd like to see from these women writing, because a lot of the writing is personal, but then a lot of it is very political. A lot of it is very drenched in Zim politics, what they would like to see as far as women's rights are concerned.
I think as far as women's rights are concerned, these women are crying for change. It would not make sense to just speak for the sake of speaking itself. If you are reading them, they are not happy with where things are, and nobody is really, because if you cannot afford to get up and turn the lights on in your house, if you have no access to clean water, if you have no access to all those basic things that you really need, the obvious is that something in your circumstance needs to change. And I think our government needs to start respecting the voices of its people, especially its most vulnerable victims, and making sure that change starts to happen. Otherwise we'll have people speaking for decades and yet no change happening, because those who cannot make change are not interested in making it happen.
Okay.
Which is part of the tragedy of Zimbabwe at present. I mean, we have this government that's really a marriage for convenience, but then the plight of the people on the ground still remains the same for the most part.
Okay. As a writer, what would you like to see Zimbabwean women or African women writers do to move to the next step? Because a lot of us are blogging, a lot of us are writing personal memoirs online or sharing it through social media. Where would you like that to go to the next step as a writer? As you see these conversations, what do you think should be the next step?
I think the next step is for all these brilliant voices to like I've already suggested, to go beyond speaking, to seize those weapons of power and change. They don't come easy, but I think there's a certain complacency that can come from the safety of blogging from behind your computer. You know, I also don't feel I'm doing enough as a writer. Of course, I'm addressing these things, but if that is not yielding to anything, I think we need to go beyond. You know, it's a tricky situation because we are dealing with a government that has already demonstrated that is ready to go, to go to whatever lengths to silence voices, as we saw with the violence of 2008 that saw activists disappearing and white farmers being killed, for example. And we're living, there's the backdrop of the Arab Spring right now, where we're seeing examples of people who were able to look at their situation and go for change at all costs. Some of them got change, but I'm citing that as a way of maybe encouraging people to just think beyond what is currently happening, especially since no change is coming. The interesting thing is some of us were born free into a free country that was won by men and women, brothers and sisters, uncles and aunts who were very trenchant about what it meant to live free. The interesting thing is, where is that spirit, in our generation? Where is that spirit when people cannot go to universities, cannot afford, to enjoy the cost of freedom that our fathers fought for? Okay. That's the question I'd like to pose to our generation. What are we doing? Are we going to live like this and maybe run away from home? Where is it going to change? Who is going to bring that change for us when we are led by men in their 80s and, they are obviously not interested in changing things?
Do you think Zimbabwe or any other similar African country going through the same leader who is ruling on and on and on?
Yes.
Do you think Zimbabwe is ripe for change with the youth? Because we can talk about unemployment, we can go on and on and on about issues.
Yes.
At what point do you think that it's the tipping point where the civil society will say, you know what, enough is enough?
I think it has been ripe. I think anytime you have, almost a significant percentage of the population living below the poverty line, anytime you have thousands of people fleeing the country in droves, anytime you have, people dying from curable diseases like cholera, what else are we waiting for? That is ripe for change, And I believe in Africa, in Africa's youth. I think we have the brilliance to lead ourselves, and I think that's what we need to. I think we need to confront that and be comfortable with that and have some courage at the same time. We can't be led by 80-year-old presidents who are out of touch with our realities. The thing is, we are good at crying, but we're not crying, we're not playing the right song. I think the right song is, it's our time. The change has to come from within. We can't write poems and stories and whatever decrying the situation. So I think a new imagination has to come, from the African youth. We are powerful people. We come from powerful people, already paved the way for us. And yet, somewhere along the way, we let the song come to a stop. Okay. I'd love to see us pick it up.
Okay. So you're saying African youth and women, like a reshifting of the mind, to bring?
Yeah, not necessarily a reshifting, because the mind is where it is. You know, we have that recognition of where things are going wrong and what needs to happen. But I guess it's a reshifting of priorities. It's easier for us to run away from home and go to greener pastures.
Right.
At the same time, who is left at home, and how are they going to, you know, affect any change by themselves?
Okay. So I'm assuming that you're saying for us to actually change things back home, we need to go back home.
Definitely, we need to go back home and be the change that we need to see. You know, I think it's as simple as that.
Okay. And as a writer, let's go back to your writing,
yes, to writing.
for a second. What would you tell the young Zimbabwean girl or a young woman, a young African woman who wants to write, to tell her story? Because yesterday we spoke a lot about the danger of a single story, or the danger of someone telling your story. What would you tell that girl who wants to amplify her voice but is not quite sure how to even get started?
I'll tell them that, you know, by you being a girl, automatically, you know, you are not expected to speak. We come from a culture of silence. We come from a culture where it's normal for not just girls, but for young people to be silenced while the adults speak. So I think the thing is to find that courage and that drive to want to tell your story, knowing that if you do not do it, somebody's going to tell it for you, and they're not, you know, they're not going to tell it the right way. So it's really a form of empowerment. You know, the voice. There's nothing as powerful as the voice, as saying this is me and I'm speaking and it's my story. I think it has to start from there, and it's something that really can translate to other aspects of your life as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And on that note, we're going to end. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much the SaharaTV viewers for joining us.
Thank you for having me.